You introduced me?
Right. I told them to remind me if I forgot anything, and I'm supposed to read their titles. All right, so Anne Marie today is going to talk to us about quantifying the effects of temperature and precipitation on soil moisture dry down rates using PBO H2O data.
Thank you. As Aisha said, my name is Anne Marie Prue. I'm from the University of Wisconsin River Falls. I'm a senior geology major, and I will be graduating in December. Now, before I get into my project, I have a rhetorical question to just ask. Okay, I am not able to. Oh, there we go. So, why is soil moisture important? Seems like a rhetorical question. But soil moisture is important because it is directly involved with the water cycle processes. So as we know, soil gets wet after it rains. It can either run through or run off, as in this picture that you see from Wisconsin. Soil moisture is also important because it is very important to plant uptake of the nutrients. Plants need this in order to grow, and it is eventually our food source. Soil moisture is also important because of cloud and weather formation. So as the soil dries out, clouds are produced and create these weather systems that may be impacting drought and global climate change. So as we know, soil gets wet after it rains. Intuitive. But the question that we were asking is, how quickly does it dry out? In order to do this, we used observations using observations to model soil moisture content, and which I'm going to just say as SNC. So as you can see in this diagram, soil moisture content is basically you have a volume of soil and a volume of water. So we're comparing how much volume of water is in this volume of soil. Most of my study is based off of Kirk and Small's 2004 study. It was a 3-year study, and it took place in the Wildlife Refuge in central New Mexico, as pictured in this map from Kirk and Small's paper. The problem with this project was that it relied on physical presence. So you had to be out there to set up the equipment and take these measurements. And the sites had to be set up and monitored individually. And multiple sites could not be compared as easily. So a new method was sort of discovered. But in order to get to that new method, we have to sort of go through how we got to this new method. So EarthScope has a plate boundary observatory nicknamed PBO. PBO uses GPS position observations to constrain tectonic movement. So it uses GPS signals to trace how much the Earth has moved, and is installed and operated by UNAVCO. PBO also has these errors, and from these errors, we're able to use usable data products. And as my writing mentor said, one man's error or woman's error becomes another man or woman's data. So the new method utilizes PBO Water Project, or just PBO H2O. And the soil moisture is the data product of this PBO H2O. And soil moisture content is determined through multipath satellite signals, which I will be explaining later on. And what is nice is that the equipment is standardized throughout this program, or project, sorry. And multiple sites can be processed at once, which gives great data and great analysis. So here is the PBO H2O soil moisture area. We're going to ignore Indiana. But most of the data is in the western United States. So the PBO has direct satellite signals that it uses to measure Earth's movements, and is received into the antenna. But as we all know, satellite signals are all over the place and enter. And from these satellite signals, there are also multiple satellite signals that is used to create, that you're able to tell the moisture of the soil for up to about 5 centimeters. So the data is collected. All readings are collected every 24 hours. It's not averaged every 24 hours. It is sent to the UNAVCO archive database and is easily accessible to the internet at the University of Colorado via this website, which is where the soil moisture data set that I was using came from. So here's one of my favorite sites. You can see the antenna here and the receiver that's sends the data to the internet, or to UNAVCO and via to the internet. So here is the data of 1 year from that site. You have the volume of soil moisture content on the left and time scale at the bottom in months. The blue dots represent each day during that year. The red line is the equation model that I used that I will be explaining later on. And I highlighted these events because these had significant dry down days that we were looking for. And as you can see on this graph right here, you have millimeters of precipitation, and you can tell from the start day of this corresponds to a rain event on the second scale. And we're going to ignore this third one. So the data is selected by choosing high soil moisture events that you saw in the previous slide. And we're just calling them rain events. We chose 17 days because that just seemed to fit the data extremely well. And we also made sure that there was no significant interruption in the 17 days. And we also tried to make sure that it had meteorological data to use. And we tried to make sure that the sites had different attributes, so different state or different vegetation cover. So we took the data that we took from that website, we processed it in MATLAB using a code to process all the rain events using the equation model that I will be talking about in the next slide. And the equation model was matched with the red lines that you saw in that other slide. And with that model, we were given tau, which I will also be explaining later, and it also gives us the accuracy. So here's the equation model that we used. You have theta as soil moisture content, T is time in days, I is initial, F is final. But here's our variable that we were looking for throughout this whole entire project. Tau is the dry down rate. So how much does the soil dry down? That was given to us in this equation right here. And it was proposed by Kirk and Small's paper. So here's an example of our best data site. You have soil moisture on the left and days of dry down on the x-axis. The red line is the equation model, and the blue stars are our data points. And the equation model gives us this tau, which means that from this point right here, there is a 3.6 day where the soil will completely dry out, or about dry out. And the R squared tells us that this model fits the data very well. This is our worst site. You have, as you can tell from the data, there was quite a bit of interruption, but we didn't think it was too significant at first, but as you can tell, there was some interruption, and so this gives us not a very accurate R squared. So the results, we were able to find 12 sites, and from these 12 sites, each has 10 events, so 120 rain events this is what we processed, was 120 events. The data spanned 5 years from 2010 to 2014, and here are the data sets that I used throughout this study. As you can tell, we tried to separate out by vegetation and by state. So you have a number of events on the left and the accuracy on the bottom. As you can tell from this histogram, most of the events have an accuracy of 85 to 99%, which means that from the 120 events, most of the data fits the model extremely well. And from this histogram, we have number of events on the left, and we have tau days on the bottom. And you can tell from this histogram that most of the events have a dry down of about 1 to 6 days. So I've already explained this. So here you have the tau dry down rate in days, and on the x-axis you have temperature in Celsius degrees. Large and small precipitation was separated out with a large precipitation being more than 5 millimeters and small precipitation being anything less than 5 millimeters. As you can tell from the trend, there is a general decrease. So as temperature increases, the tau days is going to decrease as well. Or increase. As temperature increases, the tau days is going to decrease. We tried to separate out the large and small data to see if there was significant difference in the data using this. But as you can tell, there's a lot of scattering throughout. So we concluded that more data sites need to be processed in order to get fully the relationship. And this graph basically reiterates what was said in the last slide. So you have tau days on the left, and you have the amount of precipitation on the bottom. As precipitation increases, the tau also decrease, but as you can tell from the R-squared, it's not very accurate. And this trend seems to only follow the cold days, which are less than 10 Celsius. And the hot days of more than 10 degrees Celsius seem to have no relationship whatsoever to the tau days dry down rate. And we're just going to focus on the elevation and the land types. So as you can tell from this chart that most of our data sites are grasslands, and they are pretty similar elevation. So we have a bias in our data that we found that was mostly to grasslands, and they are of the same elevation. So in conclusion, based off of the R-squared values, the model works extremely well with the data. Most rain events have a dry down rate of about 1 to 6 days after the initial event. As temperature increases, the number of dry down days shortens or decreases, and we've concluded that higher temperatures equals higher evaporation. Higher evaporation gives faster dry down rate. And we also concluded that from this graph that dry down rates are not greatly affected by the amount of precipitation. We possibly came to the conclusion that this may be due to the hydrology of the soil type. So I propose in future studies that more sites of different environments are needed. Soil types need to be included in this data to fully understand what is going on. And further exploration of vegetation cover would also help as well. And we would also like to see what seasons have effect on this data sets as well. And I leave you with this wonderful picture of my second favorite site. So as we learned that soil moisture is very important, it can be used to track droughts and global change, and it is going to be integral for the future studies. I would like to thank all these fine sponsors for bringing me to Boulder, Colorado. I have absolutely loved this summer. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. All right, Glenn, you can ask a question this time.
I can't resist on this one.
Okay.
Temperature.
Yes.
Temperature varies as a function of time every day. So what temperature are you using? And the temperature wasn't presumably the same on each of the days during the dry down.
Are you saying like what kind of data we used? Or, I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand your question.
Well, when I wake up in the morning, the temperature is one measurement.
Oh.
And then the middle of the day, it's hotter.
Right.
And then later in the day, it cools off. So what temperature is this?
The temperature used in this graph was the temperature of the day of the first initial event. So if we go back to here, the temperature is of this very first day up here, and it's averaged for that day.
So it's the average 24-hour temperature?
Of the first day of the event. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So soil textural type has a big influence on moisture characteristics, or the amount of moisture that the soil can hold. Is that a variable that you're able to look at in the drawdown or the dry down model?
We didn't have time to actually study that, but that's why I would like to actually, if I were to do this again, I would like to actually add that in to see how that has effect on it, on the dry down rates.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Anne-Marie.